Yes. Okay, I'm recording now.
Here we are with some of the people who were hosting the AI Builders Hackathon and yesterday the AI Builders Meetup in Amsterdam. We wanted to discuss a little bit about the reflections that we've had hosting the very first AI Builders Hackathon that was this large and this long at the World Trade Center Amsterdam. It was the first time we had ever done a true hackathon for 40 hours overnight. We ended up sleeping outside as part of a charity cause called the Shelter Suit Foundation. It's this amazing guy who created these suits for homeless people so that they can withstand the cold a little bit better. And we did a sleep out right outside the World Trade Center and spent the night in the cold in these shelter suits. It was a truly transformative experience. While that was going on, there was the hackathon as well. We just wanted to share a little bit of the reflections of this experience. What did you guys think?
It was fun for me. It was my first time joining any of the AI Builders events. So this is something that Luke's been incubating for a few years. And Christian, you've been involved for a year and a half. These guys have been pretty deeply involved. Christian in Amsterdam and Luke sort of organizing around Europe. They're going to start a San Francisco chapter next month. It was really cool to see the energy that was brought together, the hackathon energy, all of these creative college-age kids, adults coming to build ideas. The AI Builders session last night was a rich combination, both the technology, but as well the philosophical concerns. And it was particularly meaningful to see the integration of natural intelligence and artificial intelligence as a theme. Really happy to see NI injected into the conversation as a balancing AI. So we're not just focused on AI. We recognize
There's a dichotomy.
natural intelligence, artificial intelligence, hybrid intelligence. How will that work together?
The theme of the hackathon was how can we use AI to augment our natural intelligence rather than destroy it? How can we use AI to increase human connection, happiness, and intelligence rather than diminish or atrophy it?
And it took us a while to define that as a team because we voted on it for like 3 weeks, getting consensus among all the organizers until we decided that was the point. But it is a necessity for the future, for the developers of today, as if they do not think about the impact of AI on NI, we might end up in very dystopian words, which have been described in many science fiction books.
We've already seen some of the precursors of that, right? Like the MIT study where people using ChatGPT are seeing their brains atrophy as opposed to writing the essay themselves or using Google. So that was kind of the inspiration of having this theme for the hackathon, because AI is moving extremely fast, and there are lots of schools of thought about which direction to take AI in. Some people are the hyper efficiency people. We want to use AI to replace humans entirely so that we can have a free and just world, whatever that means. Is that even compatible? It seems that AI has increased some productivity in some places, but we don't seem to be working less. I'm a bit skeptical if that is truly the path we're going towards, but
We're not working less. We do have less workers, right? There's another layoff. Amazon just laid off 14,000 workers, 40% of whom were engineers this morning.
and the remaining people are not necessarily working less.
Why would you pay them less if, and now they've got more, but they don't want to get paid less.
Yeah.
And so there's all the work of their colleagues, the chaos from that.
We're not saying that efficiency is bad. It's about thinking deeper about the underlying concerns that AI could pose. It's such a powerful technology, and we've had powerful technologies appear in the past, like social media, which was meant to connect us, but has arguably done the opposite and has isolated and disconnected us more than ever. So with AI and the powerful technology that it presents itself as, it could have implications that are much greater than social media. We need to be thinking about these things ahead of time rather than dealing with the consequences later, which is currently the case with social media.
Social media does get a bad reputation in a lot of circles, but I would say it hasn't done the opposite of connecting us. It's done both. It has connected us in all kinds of wild and interesting ways we wouldn't have predicted, the Arab Spring and so forth, like unlocking voices that were unheard. And then it's also, on the margins, created this potential for enormous disconnection. These teenage girls' self-image in Instagram triggering intense anxiety and depression, among many, many other effects.
And also it allowed us to pick our own preferences in terms of of what we want to follow, because now we do not have any more filtering layer. Before, whatever we would see was defined or pre-chosen for us. Whatever entity decided, okay, this is going to be screened today, tonight, etc.
And I think that's kind of the point, right? It's not that the technology itself is evil. It's the way we perhaps use it or engineer the technology that has second, third order effects that were maybe unforeseeable beforehand, but caused massive devastation. And so that was kind of the purpose of this hackathon to begin with. We want to build AI systems. There's clearly value to be had there, but let's not make it something destructive. Let's make it something that creates more opportunity, that creates more collaboration between humans. And it was interesting at the hackathon, it was a hard problem for a lot of people. The very first day, the first half of the first day was basically reflection period for most of the teams. A lot of times when you go into hackathons, you know exactly what you want to build, what the parameters of the problem are. But here it was not at all the case. We were actually a little bit nervous with Christian because it was halftime of the first day and still nothing was being done really. They were still in the discussion mode. But that's really important. The fact that we have to slow down and think a little bit deeper about what are the second and third order consequences of what we're building. How can we engineer a system that has guardrails that make sure that we're increasing our epistemic autonomy? We'll see a little bit more about that when we get to the meetup.
I was super happy to hear about that slowdown. Obviously, you don't want an infinite slowdown, but it really triggered a debate. Like, okay, if we build this, well, what would the consequences of that be for our natural environment? If we build this, what was really important for me is that we seeded those discussions in people's minds. We introduced the concept of NI, complemented AI that everybody gets. It's such a simple, powerful meme, right? And then we the legitimate uncertainty. Do you want to be responsible? It's like the Manhattan Project. Do you want to be responsible for the consequence? So you have to be baking that in. With great power comes great responsibility, as you're reminded every time you get admin access to anything. It really does. And technologists have such increasing power, like global corporations growing in power, technology growing in power. Certainly the
optimists.
AI optimists and the folks who are all in on, hey, we need artificial superintelligence. What the balance is, what's the actual ethical implications of that? You can't separate the ethics from the technology, from the decisions. There's an implicit or explicit intention in your mind at all moments with every single thing you do and everything that you build. Have to check, based on that intention, where's this going to take us?
Well, this definitely calls for the topic of epistemic autonomy.
Which is weird to be diving deep into philosophy, like ethics, epistemology, and so forth, and logic, like the 5 fundamental branches of philosophy. Logic, with which everybody in the computer science world is intimately familiar. Logic is amazing, but epistemology is like, okay, the inputs to that logic, where does the data come from?
Wait, let's define epistemology for whoever does not know about it.
So
you go.
Episteme is a Greek word for knowledge, and epistemology is the study of knowledge and where does it come from? So for example, how do you know what you know? One example would be what sources of news you choose to listen. Traditionally, as you were saying earlier, it's this sort of big news production organization, so it's fairly easy to identify where society's sources of information are coming.
Yeah.
To keep a stable, sane society, it was relatively easier to scope that. Social media blew that apart. You have infinite sources of information. The talk last night on epistemic autonomy was like, how do we make decisions? And so he gave the example of a colleague of his, a journalist who had a slight cold and was weighing whether to go to a party or not with the cold. And so part of her mind was a bit torn. She's like, I could kind of use, sleeping in and resting and healing and so forth. Part of my mind, I haven't been out very much. I haven't seen these people. So she asked ChatGPT what she should do. And ChatGPT picked up certain signs. She was minimizing her own physical health. And I haven't seen these people for a long time. And so there was a bit of approval seeking in her prompt to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT picks that up and it's like, well, you haven't seen these people in a long time. You can rest later, and gave her some suggestion. She went to the party. Maybe that was a great decision. In making that decision, she was ceding her own autonomy to decide between 2 concepts. You can't directly compare health and socializing. They're different dimensions. It's really her choice to decide, am I going to prioritize health or am I going to prioritize socializing? And there's no wrong answer to that. And that was the interesting thing. But if you let somebody else or something else make that decision for you, then you will be guided in directions that may not be of your own choosing. So anyway, we were talking about philosophy, logic, epistemology, where your information comes from, and then the consequences of that. Aesthetics in terms of what's good and what's bad, and ethics, right? Like what is a good intention, bad intention? How do we guide our behavior actions?
To say a little more on the epistemic part, epistemology, you were talking about social media before and how this created division in the word and centers of gravitation and so basically we're giving up our decision on how to acquire knowledge to an algorithm that decides for us because, well, they understand our preferences. And this is what creates more division today. How can we close the gap between us choosing what to look for and the influence that the algorithms are having on us?
I think there's no clear answer. So any answer I would give, this is obviously a field of research that is currently being done. So my opinion that I'm about to express is merely that.
Fair.
But if you look at these social media algorithms, they were tuned for engagement. We know that engagement happens often through rage. So it's either through seeing things that you will be incredibly engaged with. Think about when you're angry. You are so focused on your anger. Some people see red or black out because of how much anger they were in. They're so engaged with it that they continue to scroll, for example. And so what you have are these echo chambers that begin to form of like, okay, I'm liberal or conservative. This was part of Andrew's speech that he gave, where liberals tend to have a greater, wider view for less defined categories. So things like friends, all living beings, humanity, things like that. So they have great compassion for all of those sorts of things. Whereas conservatives tend to have a lot more compassion for well-defined groups, such as family, company, nation. Both tend to think they are much more virtuous, much more compassionate than the other group. The truth is that you need a little bit of both, right? One is seeing the parts and one is seeing the whole, but there is no real difference between the two, and they're very intercorrelated with each other. You need both to survive. Social media is separating those groups into echo chambers, which further polarizes them instead of creating common ground that they can see. And he also included in his presentation how AI can impact these conversations and degrades the information quality over time within these groups to the point where everybody is just getting worse information. So we need to be able to tune the models that we are building for maybe something else other than engagement. We tried the engagement thing. It isn't working. Maybe it's less profitable. The amount we're paying now with children's lives, with people's lives, is priceless compared to any kind of profit model that you could build. And so we need to be thinking a little bit more deeply about what are the second and third order consequences of how we tune these algorithms. What are we tuning them for? We need to test them a little bit more before releasing them into production. And obviously there's a very strong tension between doing that and the current economy that we live in. Having a checklist of safety reduces your go-to-market quickness. So your competitive advantage that you would have by going to market fast goes away when you start doing checklists of, is this safe? So there's a lot of problems and moving parts going on right now. Taking your time to do things right is not baked into the incentive structure of our current economy.
And then those safety checklists, it's not just a check. It's a fundamental unknown. Humanity has never done this before. Is this going to have consequences for the mental health of teenagers? There's no way to know until you try. It really does become a research project and it becomes profoundly so. So there really is a tension. It's striking to me when you talk about anger on social media, that's moral outrage. That's actually ethics in action. And so when you get on social media and you're like, conservatives did this, or liberals did this, they're destroying society and so forth, you're exercising ethics. The polarization and divisions in society is a polarization between people think is good and people are trying to exercise their ethics on social media. But what's happening in their efforts to lead society in a good direction is this massive polarization where there's open discussion about civil war in the United States. That's very interesting. We need ethics, but we're not understanding this. Liberals and conservatives are understanding the world in different ways.
Yes.
They are the same in deeply caring about the future of humanity. They deeply care about their children, society, life on earth, prosperity. They want people to enjoy the same benefits that they've enjoyed. Conservatives have a set of theories on what it was about the past few hundred years that have led to the current benefits that humanity experiences. And liberals have a different set of hypotheses about that. It really gets into epistemology. How do you? And logic, have you thought this through carefully? And aesthetics. What would a good society look like? Even though few people have really studied philosophy, and I have not studied Western philosophy very much, it comes down to these very deep philosophical questions that are one way or another driving society.
You were making an example yesterday when we were coming back home about a person in hell that had their head drilled through constantly.
It's a Buddhist allegory of a guy who disrespected his mom, stepping over her head as he was leaving the house in indignation. He was reborn in a hell where everybody had their heads drilled into continuously. And so he was suffering day after day, year after year, life after life, his head being drilled into, he'd die and be reborn in hell and so forth. And at one point he's like, wait, I'm just obsessing over my own head. Look, open your eyes. There's all of these other people having their heads drilled into. May they be free from this suffering. And through my own head being drilled into, may these people's suffering, everybody else in hell end. And as soon as he had that insight, his hell end, he was released. It's obviously an allegory, but very powerful about self-concern, what we call self-cherishing, as opposed to caring about others. Opening your mind, opening your heart to others. I mean, where it really gets me is that my parents, whom I love dearly, 3 out of 4 of them are intensely liberal and deeply believe in their hearts that 200 million Americans are equal. You know, I was trained as a Buddhist, and I believe in universal compassion and love. And the only people in the world that I do not have universal compassion and love for are people who don't have universal compassion. And I hate people who don't have universal compassion and love.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wow, what a moral bind I'm in.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, if you're not practicing universal compassion and love, I hate and I have contempt, and I feel morally superior to everybody who doesn't have universal compassion and love, because I'm a highly spiritual being. I've trained deeply in love for even insects. Every time I rescue an insect, I'm reinforcing the idea that I am caring and morally ethical. If I was ever the emperor of the universe, I would care for all living beings just as I'm caring for these little ants and spiders and life forms. Of course, I also have evidence that if I was actually the emperor of the universe, might not be 100% focused on others all the time. This is the self-deception. A virtue, like moral indignation on social media, is reinforcing the idea that I'm more virtuous than everybody else. And it's actually reinforcing our self-centeredness, our self-cherishing, the risk, the enormous ignorance, the black hole self-centeredness is so infinitely powerful. The only way you can break out of that is connection.
And do you think AI can help us reconcile the differences that we find, for instance, in liberals versus conservatives? And if yes, how? I know this is like a tough question, but
I think Andrew actually talked a little bit about this in his presentation yesterday. One thing that this provocative statement he said was that humans are actually more binary than large language models. Humans love to be certain about things, like this is right and this is wrong. If you think about how a large language model actually functions, it functions through probabilities. They might say, there's an 86% chance that this is true, but the 14% chance that it's not, which is a more correct way of looking at the world. If we look at large language models and learn from them how to think in more probabilistic way rather than binaries, we actually can see that there's more common ground than we may have thought. We are not maybe as separated and different as we may have thought. It's maybe 50% difference. But if we focus so much on that 50% difference and become certain about it, it becomes 100%. And one thing that LLMs do really well is probabilistic thinking. They are not attached to ideas the way we are. You can talk to ChatGPT and it can talk about random stuff all the time and it doesn't seem to care about anything else, right? But humans are very locked into their priors. This is what I thought, this is what I've known my whole life. To have my world shattered is very painful and I don't want that. There's a movie called They Live about these aliens who come to Earth and there's a resistance movement that starts to happen and they give these glasses to everyone. And the glasses, when you put them on, you see the cold, cruel world of capitalism. It's in New York, so all of the billboards turn into like capitalism, obey, reproduce, like these sorts of things. There was this one scene in the movie where this guy wants to show his friend the glasses and he wants to get them to wear it. It's two construction workers. And the movie spends 12 minutes of them physically fighting because he doesn't want to wear the glasses. He doesn't want to see the truth. And what it represents really is that having our worldview shattered is extremely painful, and we do not want it to happen. And we will physically fight. That was what it was showing in the movie. We will physically fight and break the world because we want to maintain the worldview that we've protected our whole lives. And so this was a long time ago, this movie, but this is the problem is still existent today. We are locked into our priors. We don't want to change. And this is something that LLMs may be able to help us with.
One of the biggest points I took away from Daniel Bracker's talk last night was that we have proven again and again through rigorous scientific investigation that thinking is painful and uncomfortable. That thinking requires work, and we are optimized as a species wisely to save energy. If we can save energy in our thinking, fantastic. That's great, right? Don't think too hard about things. That's great until it's not. And you have to be willing to exert effort to shift your worldview. Humans are such story-driven creatures. Through human history, we have settled into one worldview, one religion, one ideology, and so forth. And you see the amazing development of human civilizations have been forming tribes and then forming cities and then forming nation states where there was a common culture, a common worldview, a common ideology, binds people together in a common understanding of the world. But then, of course, when you come in contact with groups with very different sets of values, there's the potential for conflict and abuse. Now, through the beautiful development of the internet over the last 30 years, we're in contact with thousands, millions, billions of cultures, identities, and value sets, and backgrounds and history. And it is literally driving us insane. It's like way too much. To save energy, you need to find your tribe, the group that you align with, that you agree with, that you join. That includes political orientations, a fragment. And I've been amazed to see Trump-like figures appear around the world, and that there's something very global about the conservative versus liberal splitting, schisming in the world. And this research reports on the compassion for the whole versus compassion for the parts blew my mind, right? Because I'm realizing it is literally that fundamental. Why do people tend to group those two? Why is it polar? Parts, compassion for the whole, conservative view, versus compassion for the parts, the liberal view, is a fundamental division in reality. Like reality can be, you can see this table as a whole, or you can see this table as a collection of parts, the individual pieces of wood that make it up, for example. And promo for Buddhism here, the abandonment of the extreme of singularity and the extreme of plurality, and finding the middle way, where whether you see this table as a singularity or a plurality, both are worldviews. Right? And whether you see humanity as a singularity or as a plurality, are we one species trying to figure out what's best for all of humans? Or are we many nations? China versus the US versus Russia. And literally, do you define singularity, humanity as a singularity, or humanity as a plurality, dramatically affects your world? And so that would be an example where even the division in singularity plurality is not purely liberal versus conservative. No. Right? Conservatives have this strong plurality. Nations are plural. And liberals are like, no, we're all one humanity. And so you have to break out of that. And it takes effort.
I think that's the key word here. If I would have to summarize what can be used to close the gap, it would mean we as human beings have to put effort into this. Referring to the example you made before, the people fought for 12 minutes in that movie only to not see a different point of view because they were scared of stepping out of their comfort zone.
AI Builders is an awesome organization. They're kicking off these very thoughtful groups around you where you get very smart, curious people exploring this new world of technology, also hosting these deep and very thoughtful discussions on what's important, what's the future bring, and so forth. Opening a chapter in San Francisco next month is very fun.
I actually think that you aided this as living code. Okay. You came in with an unusual speaker to AI builders, Daniel Brackett, not David.
Brecker.
Daniel,
Tristan's unable to get his name
yes,
right.
I'm sorry, Daniel. You will have to forgive me. But I'm really thankful for that because we wouldn't have found out as easily as we did that among the AI builders community, there are actually deep thinkers.
Definitely. And that was actually the first time that we had brought a proper philosopher to AI builders. It was very refreshing to hear afterwards when I was speaking amongst some of the AI builders, how refreshing it was for them and how thought-provoking it was for them. Like, oh, I never really thought about epistemic autonomy. I'm so wrapped up in the details of my technical work, how to get the API call to work, how to do this, how to do that technically. I'm not thinking about the whole, just the details and not the bigger picture. So to have someone come and poke and nudge and pry a little bit to make us think deeper about the systems we're building and the implications of it, they were very grateful for that. And it was a very interesting and inspiring conversation for a lot of people.
Yeah.
The whole of math, the whole of computer science is all rooted in philosophy, especially around logic and epistemology in the sense of data. Epistemology is getting data. Logic is what are your algorithms and how do you design the system for managing that. We have done amazingly well as a species, doubling down on logic and data. Look at what you can do with logic and data. But if we learn anything about philosophy, is that you cannot separate logic and data from aesthetics, what's good, what's bad, and how do we act in a good way and not in a bad way. I really want to see the AI builders of the world, the most logical, the most deeply thoughtful people, activate their recognition of aesthetics, which is how are you feeling in your body? How are you feeling in your mind? Ethics, what is the impact you're having on the people around you? What's the impact you're having on your future self? We have to activate. I've been in the DevOps field for 12 years, and Gene Kim's publishing company is called IT Revolution. And it's based on this idea that there's a revolution starting in engineering, having to deal with complexity on a scale that most people can avoid. Engineers, especially software engineers, the speed of change, amount of details creates complexity that requires radically new ways of thinking. The geeks will, if geeks are becoming supremely powerful, geeks need to get their heart in the right place.
And maybe, can we talk a little about living code? Because I believe living code could guide us and could guide our hearts to be in the right place. What I know is that you invite leaders of the world to reflect on the implications that their power and authority might have on this generation and the next.
Living Code is emerging out of life experience where I utterly rejected mainstream society and basically trying to find some way of life that didn't have negative side effects. And the only thing that I could come up with when I was like a teen or 15-year-old was becoming a Buddhist monk. Doesn't seem to have any negative side effects. You know, there's something philosophically and psychologically wrong in the world, and we need to get to the root of it. I went off and became a Buddhist monk for 15 years. A wonderful, amazing experience. Ended that experience, went into technology, and I realized that the fundamental problem we have in corporations is that it's very hard to work with humans. You can always debug computers in the end, right? I've never met a bug I couldn't fix in the end, except the bugs in my own mind, right? And the dysfunction in an organization is based on silos appearing in the organization, but silos in the organization are really just about silos between failure to be able to really deeply connect with, respect others, open our mind to other people's points of view, and the silos between departments reflect silos between executives and the executive's own ego and inability to see the whole. There's only one person theoretically responsible for the company, which is the CEO. Balance all of these things in tension. It's a lot of a job for a CEO on their own, right? But it really is this self-grasping, self-cherishing that is creating all of the suckiness in your jobs, right? And all of the devastation and damage from company in the world. And so Living Code is my effort to really try to bridge these two bodies of knowledge. What we know from my trainings in the Buddhist tradition, what we know from the Buddhist tradition about how do you help individuals to transform and how do you help cultures to transform? And what do we know about corporations and social dynamics and complexity theory about how do you build large systems? And yeah, the contribution that I would like to make with the rest of my life towards these big, huge challenges.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure, and we'll see you in the next episode.